Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. Palanivel Thiagarajan, the MLA from Madurai Central, the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, the new Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, whose party, the DMK, has just won the elections. Results were announced, as we know, of course, a week ago. The DMK coalition has won 159 seats out of an assembly of 234, while the opposition, the ADMK, has 75 seats only. Dr. Thiagarajan, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you for having me.
So you have a really impressive educational record, and before I ask you, questions, let me just start with telling my viewers a little bit about you. You've got an engineering degree from NIT Trichy. You studied at the State University of New York. You have an MBA in finance from the Sloan School of Management. You were a banker in Singapore before you came back home in 2015, and now you're a politician. So, I mean, it's quite a journey for you from being a banker to a politician. But before I ask you why and what your priorities are, I do want to get down to the COVID situation in Tamil Nadu. You have a lockdown for 2 weeks coming up. Tamil Nadu has just recorded over 25,000 cases. Tell me a little bit about how the new government is going to deal with this.
Well, I think the fundamental difference is that our government started with the notion that transparency was the primary basis for coming out of the problem. Just by way of background, I, as an individual, as an MLA, but as an individual, had filed a public interest litigation in the High Court of Madras, statistically proving that the government of Tamil Nadu's data was inconsistent. The data between the city level, the district level, and the state level was inconsistent. The data between the number of deaths reported for Madurai district and what I could find in the crematoriums in my constituency, I'm not talking about last June, July, August, was wildly different, 5:1, 3:1. And I had done an excess death study. I looked at the death, the crematorium utility rates before COVID and after, and found that the ratio was, 5:1, 3:1. So I had filed a litigation. Anyway, now that we are the government, one of the first things my leader did was he called all the authorities and he said, come clean. And so sure enough, they came clean. And once they came clean, as it was with the old model of hiding the data, we had already hit twice the peak of the first wave. Now we are hitting about 4 times the peak of the first wave because the true numbers are getting exposed.
So I think the truth is that the previous government was hiding data. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I had proven that in my paper, in my case. My PIL showed that there was a discrepancy between what was happening and that I had recorded that as an MLA. Of course, I was not the only guy. The Times of India had first found about 480 hidden deaths in the first 2 or 3 weeks, meaning Madras Corporation showed those deaths and the state of Tamil Nadu's Madras district report didn't show those deaths. And Madras is unique or Chennai is unique because Chennai is 100% the urban district. So the corporation and the district are one. So, we know there can be no discrepancy. So anyway, I think the first is to start with clear data. The second is to be much more in communication with the people. Back when I was in opposition, back in March, April of 2020, I have been on national shows like Rajdeep Sardesai and India Today, published articles in the Quint, and as an ex-operations research major, as an ex-kind of analyst, I had recommended a series of steps. I said, you must start with better data, better communication. People are scared and the government is not communicating enough. What are the true risks? What are the different stages? Who should go to a hospital? Who really needs oxygen, etc. So, we had a cabinet meeting this morning for the first time since our new government was formed. And of course, the proceedings of the meetings are confidential. But the output of the meeting was that those districts that have high levels of infection, they have designated a minister in charge to go and monitor the situation on a daily basis and work with the special officer, which is an IS officer designated for that district, plus the collector, plus the medical college deans and so forth.
So every major district which is affected will have a minister in charge?
Exactly, yeah. That list should be coming out now. I can without giving any great secrets away, say that I have been assigned my district of Madurai.
Which is Madurai.
So I'm going to move, I'm right now in Chennai because of the cabinet meeting and the swearing in of the MLAs. Constitutionally, that has to happen within a certain number of days of the election results and the certificates being released. So that's due, in a day and a half.
Right.
And once that swearing in happens, then I'm going to relocate to, I have a house in Madurai where I'm from,
sure.
and relocate to Madurai and stay there till at least till the end of lockdown.
Right. So COVID is obviously a big priority, and to crack down on COVID. And as we've seen, I'm in Delhi, and Delhi is sort of completely exploding. Has been.
Yeah, it's depressing. It's unbelievable almost. Yeah.
Right. So, but before so apart from COVID, what are the other priorities that you would have personally as finance minister?
Well, it's very hard to have any other priorities when you're in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So I think it's very, very clear that as of today, 100% of our effort is focused on the pandemic. I had a brief meeting, and I have 4 departments. I'm not just the Minister for Finance, but the designation for me is Minister for Finance and Human Resources Management.
I see.
What that means in practical terms is that I have the Department of Finance, the Department of Pension and Pension Benefits, the Department of Planning, and the Department of Personnel and Administrative Reforms, which is the home department for about 1.5 million, about 15 lakh state government employees, excluding the IAS and IPS officers of 300 or so.
Sure.
So I had a meeting of the top officers of these departments, and I was very clear with them. I said, the leader has given us kind of walking instructions. And as of today, till the second wave is under control, 100% of our focus is on COVID management. Because I happen to be a finance professional, because I happen to be the lead speaker on the budget for the last 4 years, because I happen to be on the Public Accounts Committee for the last 5 years, I have a series of questions about data for the finance department and for the state's kind of balance sheet that is not obvious to me as an opposition MLA. The government has not been forthcoming enough, in my opinion. If I, as an MLA, as an ex-banker, could not understand it, then surely the common man does not have enough information. So I'm going to leave you with this research request. And all I ask is that when I come back, I have answers to as many of these questions as possible. I don't want anything else, including personnel changes, including reassignments, etc. We are going to put off till we get kind of the second wave under some kind of control and tamp it down.
So Dr. PTR, let me ask you, you are an operations guy, like you said. Now, if you look at Delhi, it's only 24 hours or so ago that the Supreme Court has ordered that a national task force on oxygen management be set up. Uttar Pradesh, which is amongst the worst hit, there is very little data coming out. Journalists are sort of anecdotally saying that there is a lot of underreporting, but nobody knows. Even in Delhi, actually, it's only now that the Arvind Kejriwal government is putting out some information. Dr. Harshvardhan, the health minister at the center, has, I think for the first time since the second COVID wave, there are numbers now finally of how many people are in an ICU, how many on ventilators. So how would you look at this mess?
Yeah, I mean, let me be frank. I think, and I don't want to talk politics. I want to talk about the nature of our society.
Sure.
For a guy who lived 20 years in the US and then, about 5-6 years in Singapore, was global head, and so I've traveled to 60, 70 countries, something like that. And I've, as an ex-operations research professional, as an ex-kind of ergonomics student and things like that. The whole nature of risk management and disaster preparedness is woefully inadequate in our system, in our democracy. Mm-hmm. And I think, we in Tamil Nadu, we saw that. The 2015 December was a massive flood in Chennai, if you remember, from the kind of once-in-a-century rains. That's right. The CAG report on that, which because I'm a PSC member, I got it. Now, there was some discrepancy in the report itself. It was not released for 1 year too late. That's a different legal issue or a constitutional issue. But when it did come out, it was damning. It said that the state's disaster management committee had not met even once in 3 years. Since its formation, it had not met once. Mm-hmm. And so they had no protocol for when they should take what action. And so when the rainwaters kept building up, the person who in let's say a DMK regime, every superintending engineer of every water body in charge has the authority to lift the gates when the water gets too high. Mm-hmm. In Ms. Jayalalitha's regime, 100% of their authority rested with her. So they were not able to get through to her. The report, I mean, this is in the CAG report. I'm not making this up. The CAG report says because they were unable to get through to her to get a decision from her, they had to delay the opening by a cruelly kind of inefficient 24 hours. And so by the time they finally got through to her or the waters broke, there was no protection. It just swept the whole thing down. They should have been releasing water from 24 hours ago, but nobody could get through to her.
So centralization, it was completely centralized.
Yeah, I mean, something as simple as opening the dam, right? I'm saying, but that's the secondary aspect. The point I'm making is that the disaster management committee had not met even once in 3 years. So in that culture, listen, I'm both a kind of applied psychology student from my PhD days and an operations student, research student from my master's days. This is the fallibility of human nature. And particularly in politics, nobody wants to take the time out in the midst of 1,001 other demands to plan for a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 event. So, it's not irrational. I mean, it is unprofessional, it is bad governance, but this is human nature that nobody wants to play low odds events. If you study psychology, you say people have a very hard time kind of truly discriminating low probability and high probability events. Once the probability goes below 10 or 15, your mind tracks you to 0. And once it goes above 85 or 90, it tracks you to 100.
Yeah, so, but in this particular case, it's not as if, okay.
No, that's exactly my point. So I'm saying, so we started out with that as the template. But in this case, we have no excuse, because in this case, we saw this coming in March of 2020, maybe you had an excuse. But you certainly have no excuse in January or February or March of 2021. It has been more than a year. So I would consider it a significant administrative failure for any government that did not do this kind of planning. And I'm happy to send you links to my articles. Back 1 year ago, just as an ex-operations research professional and an ex-kind of industrial and risk management consultant, I listed out a series of steps. And I said, everywhere else in the world, they do things like this. One of the ways you should be looking at this is tracking excess deaths. Because your testing rate is so low, you can't even tell how many people are dying of the disease or not. So all over the world, they did this. They just said, what was the average death rate in, let's say, January through June of 2018? What was it in 2020? What was it in 2021? And therefore, you know how many additional deaths have happened. Now, it's possible that marginally some of these, the death rate is reduced because there are not people out on the roads, and accidents and industrial safety and all that is not a cause. And it's possible that because of being homebound, stress and lack of dialysis and all is a marginal cause. But net, the bulk of the increase in deaths must be COVID related. So even if you're not testing enough people, you can tell the impact and you can start planning and kind of, strategizing for how to deal with it. So as a professional, it's deeply frustrating to me, not just, in Tamil Nadu. And I must confess that as bad as it is in Tamil Nadu, the stories I hear about Delhi or UP or Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh, are just like unbelievable to me. So as bad as it is in Tamil Nadu, I would still say we are far, far, far removed from the depths of the problem that I read about and see. And I see with my eyes at least the pictures of the makeshift crematoriums and the queues for the bodies. So by God's grace, it's not that bad here.
So explain to me something. You said that in a country like ours, fine, we underreport infections. Testing itself is very low. But in a country like ours, we cannot hide deaths, because a cremation or a burial is such a public sort of.
Well, I would disagree with you there. I think this is the thing that India is this kind of dichotomy in every way. So on the one hand, we are such an integrated society that in my village or in my ward or in my street, even in a corporation like the city of Chennai, it's very hard to hide a death. I completely agree. But if you say, does the Corporation of Chennai record all deaths and does it issue death certificates in all cases? The answer is absolutely not. In fact, the reason that the Hindu newspaper of Chennai published an article as early as May of last year, showing that hundreds of, in fact, 1,000+ deaths in April and May had gone unrecorded by the corporation, because the person who's authorized to issue the death certificate is a health inspector or a sanitary inspector, and those people claim they were so overwhelmed with, disinfectant spraying. I mean, the science was poor at that time. We didn't realize whether it was surface touch or air transmission or what it was. But those individual corporation employees claimed that they were so busy doing other things that they couldn't bother to record the deaths. So in my constituency, there's a gap between all three. The number of bodies that were cremated is, let's say, 600. The number of bodies that are recorded in Madurai corporations, or the number of deaths that are recorded in Madurai corporations register are, let's say, 200. Because, it is a bit complicated by the fact that other people from remote areas, rural areas, come into the government hospital in the city, then die, then get cremated here without being taken back. So there's some discrepancy. But still, there's 600 actual cremations, 200 death certificates, and the government of Tamil Nadu statistics will show that 85 people died of COVID. Right? So now there's this huge problem, because the normal cremation rate in that crematorium would have been about 130 or 150. Where did we go from 150 to 600? So, all these systems break down. You're right in some sense that individual deaths cannot be hidden. I completely agree. We are a much more integrated society. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody is related to everybody. Everybody knows of each other's lives. But gross statistical discrepancies can easily creep in, and in fact are the norm. In most government statistics, gross discrepancies are the norm. So I'm not surprised.
So, so that's one, is that this huge discrepancy between actual deaths and recorded deaths.
Yeah.
But I'm asking you to, you're sitting far away in Chennai. By the way, you have 5 dogs, I also read, and you've already endeared yourself to the viewers and the readers of the print, because we all love dogs. But to come back to the question about the situation in Delhi, for example. Now, would you say that, how would you explain what's going on in Delhi? I mean, Delhi's population of 20 million people.
Look, I don't mean to be evasive, but I am not, qualified or competent to talk about things that I only read about secondhand. Right? You ask me about Tamil Nadu, I feel like I know what's going on, either because I was an opposition MLA or now I'm a government minister. What I read about Delhi comes from people like you, so I'm hardly qualified. I mean, I have some interpretations of what I think are government failures and the kind of discrepancy.
Yeah, so
yeah. I mean, I think part of it is, of course, that Delhi has a unique problem that we don't have, which is that this tug of war between what is really in the power of the state, though there's, it's kind of a quasi-state, if you will, government of Delhi, and the center is a bit more complicated than the relationship between, let's say, Tamil Nadu and the center and the union, which is a very, it may be contentious, but it is constitutionally relatively clear. But part of it, I think, is that, a lot of people talk, a lot of people kind of project, but doing is something completely different. And I think there's been a bit of a gap between kind of promise and execution. Beyond that, it's probably not appropriate for me to, at least sitting in the seat I am, it's probably not appropriate for me to comment on other people's performance.
So, but I will ask you to comment on, the example that you gave about the 2015 floods in Chennai, and how people wanted Jayalalitha, who was then chief minister, her approval to, say, open a floodgate or something. Now, would you say that the same thing is happening at the center? Is that, once the prime minister announced the end of the pandemic at no less than the World Economic Forum in January, after that, everybody said, okay, it's over. The health minister said it's over.
Well, the center, I think, is an unmitigated disaster. Because, and I say this, kind of apart from politics, because I say the center had 3 unique problems. The first problem was the center doesn't realize, at least this center doesn't realize, that it is 2 levels or 3 levels removed from reality. What happens in Delhi is not indicative of what is happening in the country. Within Tamil Nadu, what is happening in I'm telling you, there are only 6 or 7 districts where there's massive spread. So only those 6 or 7 districts have a designated minister.
Right.
So within Tamil Nadu, within Chennai, within every corporation, within every district, there are great discrepancies. Within Tamil Nadu, the rural to urban quality of life, access to certain services is quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So this notion, Delhi started with the wrong notion. Delhi started with the wrong notion that there is such a thing as a one X, one India, one X. Right? One India, one scheme, one India, one tax, one India. This whole notion of one India, one X is juvenile. I'm sorry to use that word, but it's juvenile. Anybody who understands anything about systems, I'm saying I'm an ex-operations research major. The complexity of dealing with 1,400,000,000 people across states that you designed to be ethnically different. You as a country, you split up the states based on language. They have different cultures, they have different, diets, they have different practices. And they have, over the last 40, 50 years, particularly since the 1990 reforms, diverged greatly in outcomes. And I keep using the same example, I'll use it again. The average Tamilian is a woman with 50-something, 51 point something percent. The probability is 31 or 32 years old, has a per capita income of 2,45,000, is a high school graduate, and has a cell phone. Mm-hmm. The average Bihari is 19 years old, 60% chance or 57% chance of being a male, elementary school dropout, 50,000 rupee per annual income, and hasn't a hope of going to college. So we are not talking about the same kind of social structure or the social
Yeah, but let's give the Prime Minister his due. I mean, this is the first time that he's been Prime Minister. He was Chief Minister of Gujarat for 12 years. So when he comes to Delhi, I think he was trying, this one nation, one tax, or one nation, one sort of ration card, or one nation, etc. I think he's just trying to sort of build this, build like connections across the diversity of India.
I believe it is incredibly naive to assume you can do anything, especially after you've been Chief Minister for 13 years, that you realize the complexity of things. I mean, Gujarat is not a small state. It's one thing if you're Chief Minister of Delhi, or even I would say Chief Minister of Kerala, 20, 30 million people. But you're Chief Minister of a state of 50, 60 million people, you understand the great differences between the coastal areas to the rural areas, to the farming, to the trading, to the seaports. And then you think that you can do something from Delhi, that's one.
So are you saying that the Prime Minister doesn't understand India?
No, I'm saying he simply has, his reach is greater than his grasp. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that if he believes he can impose a one-size-fits-all solution, if he believes that he can tell people while sitting in Delhi that the Home Ministry can issue a diktat that says which district and which town and which village should open its barber shops or not, I think that is a fundamentally flawed model of governance. In fact, I've gone on record, I'll go on record again. Why I think Kerala works even better than Tamil Nadu in some ways is that Kerala has devolved power down to the local bodies. Go back to the supplies, and I think this is where we digressed. If you look at the actual delivery of oxygen and aid and remdesivir and all the stuff that's coming from Singapore, from Israel, from all these places, there are so many stories in the press of the volumes arriving in Delhi not getting logistically separated and dispersed as efficiently as possible. Right? So one asks the question that this kind of centralization has been proven to be a logistical nightmare in thousands of cases. Anybody who studied operations research, anybody who studied complexity of systems, anybody who's studied, optimization, queuing theory, network systems, understands that you cannot centralize. And, the classic example of that was in demonetization, when, Mr. Shaktikant Das, now the RBI governor, then the revenue secretary, once went on TV and said, we are making this announcement that starting tomorrow morning, all the bank will start putting inks, indelible ink like my voter ink, on fingers. And I just, fell off my chair laughing, because I said, here is a country where we are not even able to get the printed notes to the people in the right place. We don't know how to get the old notes back. How is Mr. Das going to arrange a supply of indelible ink for 1.5 lakh branches in some consolidated, coordinated way then figure out the logistics of splitting them, figure out the logistics of delivering them, figure out the training mechanisms to train, let's say 5 lakh or 10 lakh tellers, and then put in CCTV cameras or monitoring systems to make sure that this is happening. This is not a doable thing. Mr. Das is living in fantasy land. Sure enough, within 24 hours, they came and said, actually, all node exchanges are banned. So I'm saying anybody with simplistic experience in operating systems will tell you some things are just not doable. And yet we have the Revenue Secretary of the Government of India, he's saying the equivalent of tomorrow I'm going to take a walk on the moon for after breakfast. It's just not in the realm of possibility, right?
Right.
So something gets disconnected here. I don't understand how.
No, so clearly, with demonetization, like you're saying, it wasn't thought through, and we saw what happened. People just sort of waiting in queues to exchange their old money for new, even died. I mean, about 100 people lost their lives. But with the current pandemic crisis, if you were Prime Minister, or say, what would you say to the Prime Minister now? One is, you believe that there is an over-centralization of...
yeah, I mean, that's a no-brainer, because that's not just about the pandemic, that's about everything, from education to food to everything. But I would say that we have lost precious time when we should have been planning. And I say this now in my state. We have only taken office, 72 hours or so ago. So, we started planning and we started discussing on the assumption that we would come to power. We started the day after polling ended. So polling ended on April 6th, and we started planning on April 7th, including our best estimation of which IAS officers should be put in which post, who would be good for continuity, who would be needed for change, what did we already know from the analysis that people like me had done, and so forth. So I think, there is no substitute for timing in life as it is in the markets. But we are where we are. It's not fixable, it's not correctable. Now I would say the things that we are doing here under my leader's approach, which is massive transparency, overwhelming increase in communications. I think people are just scared. People don't understand, right? Like, we have a huge discrepancy in who gets oxygen, who gets a bed, who goes to the ICU, who goes to hospital. Everybody's scared. So the first sign of any symptom, everybody runs to get the maximum resources that their social status and their monetary status allows. That's not what's good for society. There are many patients who should be home.
Right.
Infected patients who should be home. There are many people who should be only getting kind of, paracetamol level drugs and nothing else. There are many people who should be getting oxygen and nothing else. There are only then some people who need to be hospitalized. And then there are very few people who need to be on ventilators or ICUs or whatever it is. But we are not allocating, we are not in a position to allocate them in a market efficient way, because not everybody has equal access. So we have the structural problem that we are trying to improve by massive communication and by having distributed triage centers and distributed oxygen bed capacity, so that we are not going to have these hospitals overloaded and we have people being taken care of. That's my goal when I go back to Madurai, and I'm going to have a conference call tomorrow, that's the plan we're going to set up for, that we want to have, maybe 10, 20, 30 different, triage centers where people can come for symptoms and not have to all go to the government hospital or to,
I think that's what Mumbai has done, and the BMC.
Yeah, but what you need though is, if you do that, you must have an integrated information system.
Yeah.
See, what you cannot afford to do is afford to have 30 or 40 different centers that operate on 30 or 40 different standard operating models. You must have a standardized model, and you must have a collective information. So if you sense that the demand for shifting from these to the hospital is rising, you must be able to sense, is it rising in only one place? Is it rising in 8? Is it rising in 20? What does it tell me? Where are the localized hubs? Or is this a global problem? Global meaning within my range of view. So you need, I think, integration through data systems and monitoring, and distribution of the touch points of human beings as the solution. And that, I think, is the only way to come through this. And you have much more likelihood of allocating resources efficiently if you have multiple touch points than one. Having a 1,000-bed hospital is not as good as having 10, 100-bed hospitals. Right. Let me put it that way. Right?
But tell me, now that when you're sitting in Chennai, how do you look at the messaging? You talked about communication and messaging and appropriate messaging. Now, the Prime Minister some weeks ago did address the nation when he talked about the fact that we are in the middle of a crisis. Now, do you think?
Yeah, I think again, sorry to interrupt you, but I think one man making one speech is good, but it's like hardly the tip of the iceberg. When I say messaging, I mean get meme creators, get video creators, put it out on WhatsApp, put it out on social media, have it go to the policemen who are supposed to be enforcing the laws. I think we have such efficient messaging tools. I'm the head of the IT wing for the DMK. We can do scale messaging with almost zero marginal cost to hit almost every phone in this country, or at least in my state.
The BJP has huge, access.
Exactly.
So why do you think
my point is that we must make things that people understand, and it's very clear that 30-second to 1 minute videos, audio clips, memes, kind of funny or a bit colloquial visual content is what really penetrates. So that's the kind of messaging we should be saying about. What are the risk factors? What are the symptoms? What levels of there? Where should you go at what level? And for example, we're going into a lockdown tomorrow. We have no other choice, just like everybody else. So we're going into 2-week lockdown. So it should not just be communication about this. It should be communication about the modalities of the lockdown. You can't just issue one government paper and assume that people read it. Right?
So
I'm saying with a high literacy state like Tamil Nadu,
but why do you think
not adequate.
But why do you think the central government has still not done this?
Look, I'm not sure the central government really understands, other than politics, the notion of messaging. Because, for example, when the Prime Minister spoke, I'll go back to the same address that you talked about. The Prime Minister spoke in Hindi without a translator translating into either Tamil or English. How does that speech penetrate in Tamil Nadu? Surely, if you're a great communicator, surely if you're the Prime Minister of the country, your ambition is to make yourself understood by every citizen in this country, not only those who can speak Hindi. Now, whatever that ratio is, that I don't need to argue that. But surely you must admit there is some percentage of this country that does not speak Hindi. So surely you must have either a transcription or a translation or something else going on, subtitles in some other language so people can understand. So I'm not sure that we are kind of thinking about this even in the same approach, right? I feel like I'm looking at something like football and they're looking at something like cricket.
So as a Tamil guy, when you hear the Prime Minister in Hindi, what do you think? Do you think that maybe, you don't understand what he's saying, so maybe, I don't know what
without any disrespect, I don't really watch the Prime Minister's speeches. I haven't, I have a lot of things to do and I'm not really...
So maybe you don't watch them, Mr. Dr. Thiagarajan, but other people do watch, but when they don't...
Listen, you ask me a question, what do you think? I'm saying I don't think because I don't watch. I don't know what other people think. It's hard for me to imagine what other people think, but I don't watch because I haven't found any value in them. My Hindi is possible, but not good enough for me to really understand. And so, I have a lot of responsibilities and I've never yet seen a single speech. So I don't have an opinion. I'm sorry.
So do you think this is an average sort of a reaction, which is that if you don't even understand what the PM is saying, then why bother watching?
Yeah, I go one step further than that, right? Like the central government has all these schemes, right? Which they through the cesses and this and Swatch something and Chris. Now, for the longest time, neither did they do the translation of that into English.
You mean like Swachh Bharat? Like Swachh Bharat. You don't understand what Swachh Bharat means.
What does Swachh Bharat mean to anybody in Tamil Nadu? What does the word Swachh mean? Swachh is a Sanskrit word or a Hindi word that means clean. But that doesn't mean anything in the villages in Tamil Nadu, right? What does Krishi Kalyan mean? They don't understand anything. So either you must do a translation into Tamil or you must do a translation into English, which in Mr. Everybody knows that the Atal housing scheme, which was there before or whatever, the JNURM, Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Rural Mission, they had a Tamil equivalent for it. Kudisai Matra something Kittam. So all the other schemes till 2014 used to get translated into languages that people could understand, or at least into English. In this regime, all they did was they did transliteration. So they would write Swachh Bharat in Hindi, they would write Swachh Bharat in English, and they would write Swachh Bharat in Tamil. Swachh Bharat is a meaningless word in Tamil, right? It's a meaningless set of words in Tamil. So if you ask me the question, why does the BJP not seem to penetrate beyond like Nota or 2% or 3% vote in Tamil Nadu in any election? I say you are not communicating with the people. How do you penetrate if you don't communicate? Right? I was the head of the IT wing back in 19 also. I still am. But in 19, we ran our ads in Tamil. We ran marginally few ads in English. The BJP's ads in Tamil Nadu ran in Hindi. What is the value of spending money to run election campaign advertising in Tamil Nadu in Hindi? How does it help you? On the margin, it hurts you. It's like telling the Tamil people, I don't even bother to translate my message into something you can read. You should see my flag and vote for me no matter what the letters are, meaningless.
Yeah, but they won 4 seats this time, and I think they got...
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I have a coalition partner who carries 35% of the vote and I get 2.36% of the vote, it's not a
great
achievement. They won 4 seats out of the 20-something they
That's
stood
not
for.
so bad.
So the Congress...
20 is not so bad. It's like one... I said 4 seats out of 20 is not so bad. It's 1/5.
Yeah, 4 seats out of 20 is not so bad compared to, let's say, the ADMK, which won more like, 6 out of its 10, or, it doesn't matter. It's relative. And but incidentally, it's not as if this is the first time they're breaking ice, right? They had BJP MLAs in the Tamil Nadu Assembly going back to 96 or 2001 or something. So, depending on their coalition partner, the coalition partner gives them 2 or 3 seats. It's not the first time. It won't be the last time.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of last questions, and which is that, I was just looking at some of the figures, and it seems as if the state government is broke. I mean, you probably know better than me, but what I've read is that you have a burden of over 5.7 crores, and your fiscal deficit is perhaps the highest it has been this century, meaning at least for the last 21 years. So what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the word broke means anything because it's all relative, right? If you ask me, the government of Tamil Nadu's finances are the worst it's been, I don't know about 25 years, but worst that it's been since 2004, since the enactment of the Fiscal Responsibility Act in Tamil Nadu and the FRBM Act in Delhi. Again, it's relative. It's not as good as it could be, but it's probably twice as good as the government of India's. The government of India's debt to GDP ratio is more than twice as bad as the government of Tamil Nadu. The government of India's fiscal deficit is more than twice as bad as the government of Tamil Nadu. The government of India's revenue deficit is more than twice as bad as the government of Tamil Nadu. So it's all relative. And governments don't go broke. Governments have the right to tax and governments have the right to print money depending on the state or national level. And so, broke is not the right word. But the burden of debt, and much more important, the burden of interest is really what worries us. But we are at a situation where 7 years of mismanagement, and I say this apart from politics, as long as Ms. Jayalalitha was there also, it was not bad. It is only after Ms. Jayalalitha's hands came off the wheel when she went to jail the first time in Bangalore, and these substitutes ran the government for 7 years, that what was otherwise till then a cumulative revenue deficit of only about 3,000, 4,000 crores, cumulative, life to date, has now become a cumulative revenue deficit of about 2 lakh crores. So that is a fundamental decline. And, it is no longer at the realm of being able to be restructured on a marginal basis. It is not something that we can gradually work out using the traditional methods. So we will have to do some debt restructuring. We will have to do some asset sale. But that's what the government of India does every year, or at least tries to do every year.
So the question is what freebies? I mean, Tamil Nadu is sort of infamous, perhaps, for doling out, and I know what you've said about sort of, food for children.
Yeah, but I think, again, people really ought to do a bit of math and a bit of homework. 70 cents of every dollar or 70 paisa of every rupee of spending of the government of Tamil Nadu goes towards salaries, pensions, and what we call non-wage O&M, non-wage operations and maintenance. So freebies cannot be the basis for you not being able to balance your books, right? The freebies are marginal, or what you call freebies, but I would not call all freebies. You've heard my comments. So the noon meal scheme, if that's a freebie, I'll do that every day of the week, and the rest of the country seems to be following me. So, in that sense, I think the scale, people misunderstand the scale. Tamil Nadu's biggest problem is not its spending, it's revenue. Tamil Nadu's revenues, which were 10.5% of GSDP, have dropped to 7 before COVID and dropped to 6 after COVID. Something has gone structurally wrong. There is more corruption or inefficiency or breakdown in the system in revenue than it is in spending, than there is in tenders or commissions or contracts. So that needs to be fixed first.
Right.
The second thing I would say is that on the margin of spending, governments have some constraints. So when we were running a revenue surplus or a balanced revenue government, our year-over-year growth in spending was 13-15% a year in notional terms, in just rupee terms, including the inflation of money. And that has slowed because when you're borrowing, you can't raise spending by that level. So in fact, this ADMK government, not only did they rack up debt and rack up interest payments, they actually spent much, much slower because they had no choice. They were hemmed in by the debt ceiling. So we need to fix all that.
So last quick question, and before I let you go, you know, your Chief Minister's son, Udaynidhi Stalin, who's also an MLA, he's one from Chipok, has all these really fancy cars. I don't know if you've seen them. He's got a Maserati, he has a Hummer. I mean,
yeah, I think, well, I think you should first, you know, till he was not an MLA, you had the right to say what he had or didn't have. He's now an MLA. As an MLA, as you may know, even as an MLA candidate, we all have to go and file a disclosure statement that tells us tells the public what we own. So I would first urge you to go and look at his disclosure statement and see what car he owns. I think the cars you're talking about may have been parked in his house, but at one time when the raid came and the stories came, but they are not his assets. You can go and check his disclosure statement. If you believe his disclosure statement is wrong, you should file a complaint with the Election Commission. But you cannot assume that a man owns cars that he doesn't declare under perjury constraints or under penalty of law that he doesn't own.
so he doesn't own those cars, you're saying?
You please check his declaration statement. I've declared 5 cars or 4 cars or something, Innovas and Skodas and Isuzus and stuff. Whatever I have, if it turns out I own something I haven't declared, I can get disqualified from being an MLA for that.
Okay, absolutely. The last question. You're the MLA from Madurai Central, and I know that you're a devotee of the goddess of at the Meenakshi temple, which is absolutely it's stupendous. I mean, that temple, I've had the good fortune to visit it myself. How does that square the fact that you're somebody who's known to be so devout with the fact that your party is acknowledged to be an atheist party?
Yeah, listen, I sent you a couple of articles, but I think I've said this many times before. We are what we consider the Dravidian movement. The Dravidian movement's first political party was called the Justice Party. After the Justice Party became defunct, a social movement called the Dravida Kalagam, or the DK of Periyar, came to being, but it did not want to compete in politics. It wanted to stay a social movement. And Mr. Annadurai, C.N. Annadurai, who we call Aringer Anna, broke away because he said, we must be like the Justice Party back in electoral politics, and he formed the DMK. And then, of course, Mr. MGR broke away from the DMK and formed the ADMK and so on and so on and so forth. But the Justice Party was full of devout Hindus. There was no natural conflict between Hindu belief and Dravidianism. My grandfather did renovation of half a dozen temples, some multiple times, and donated the main idol that is in place in Sabrimala today. The Ayyappan's idol in Sabrimala today was donated by my grandfather. So the Justice Party was full of devout Hindus. When Periyar felt that social revolution was the only way, and he felt that the genteel people of the Justice Party were not making social change fast enough, he broke away from the Justice Party and created the Dravida Kalagam and was a avowed anti-Hindu. Now, Periyar's own words, which I've said at the India Today conclave with Rajiv Sadesai, he said, if you tell me there is a God that doesn't require contributions, that doesn't require sacrifices, that doesn't require people to be stratified higher or lower, that doesn't say menstruating women should not come, that doesn't say that one person can come to this inside sanctum and one person should stand on the outside sanctum. If there is such a God, then I also am happy to follow that God. When I say that, they label me atheist. Said the term atheist has no meaning at all. I am not for this system. But of course, he was a social reformer, he was a revolutionary, he had a turn of phrase. So I'll give you the classic phrase. He said, don't break coconuts for Pallayar, break the Pallayar idols. So that was as vehement as Periyar was in his this thing. But back in 1959, when Aringer Anna came away, he said, we are giving up a lot of things. Periyar was a secessionist. He wanted a separate country. He wanted a kind of complete ban on religious practices. Anna came away and he said, we are the Dravidian progressive movement. That's why he said DMK, Dravida Munnetra Kalagam, which in Tamil is progressive. And he said, we have given up a lot of these extreme positions, including this kind of heavy anti-belief. And he makes two statements. He's a catchy slogan. He was, after all, a film writer and a man of great literary skill. And so he said, Ondre kulam orvane devan. All humanity is one. All gods are one. We make no distinction. We agree that it's okay. You can, all religions are equal. But he gave a very detailed explanation. He said, to the extent that I am against what I call Mooda Nambike, or blind faith, or illogical practices, or irrational things like a woman should jump into the fire when her husband dies, then yes, I am a rationalist. But that does not mean I am against God. And he says, in fact, to the extent that a person's faith in God makes that person a better human being, because that faith in God makes the person want to behave better to the other human beings who are also children of the same God, then I welcome it. And I believe that such faith is good for society, because it makes all human beings better human beings, because they want to be better children of their God and be better fellows to their fellow children of God. So this is how clear Anna was. Now, this was 1950s, 1960s. My grandfather, my father, and I have been devout followers all our lives. It has not hindered our chances in getting, my grandfather was minister, chief minister, many things. Yeah. My father was speaker, minister. I am a two-time MLA and a minister with a heavy portfolio. I have not just finance, but finance, pensions, administrative reforms, personnel, planning, right? So the 1.5 million Tamil Nadu state government employees, management falls under me. This is not a small job. And it has been given to me, despite you can see the sign on my forehead of what my faith is. So this notion that somehow the DMK is an anti-Hindu party or an anti-religion party is just a political canard, not backed by fact.
Okay, in that case, absolutely the last question. I mean, I was in Kerala recently, was covering the elections, and the Sabrimala issue comes up again and again, not as much as it did some years ago, but now, of course, it's in the Supreme Court. Now, you said your grandfather was instrumental in installing the Ayyappan date, in the 50s. Would you say today that you should follow tradition, and which means that menstruating women should not be allowed? Or should this...
Look, let me say two things. It's not my job to intervene in a thing that is not even in my realm of control. But I want to say two things, which I hope is of value to you. The first is that the norms of a society are unpredictable, and they are kind of, what can I say, instantaneous or haphazard at best. You take a society like Tamil Nadu, which I would say is the most Hindu devout part of India. Every street has 5 or 10 temples. Every community has a priest. In some temples, they kill chickens and goats as sacrifice. In some temples, you cannot even, go in if you've eaten meat that day. You have the widest diversity of religious practices within the umbrella of Hinduism that you can find anywhere in this country. And yet we have the greatest following. It is not a coincidence. Because religion has been democratized, because the Temple Entry Act was signed, because anybody can be a trustee, because women compulsorily must be trustees, because every major temple must have Adi Dravida, scheduled caste, as a trustee, because anybody can be a priest, because the prayer should be said in Tamil, not just Sanskrit, because you have democratized religion, you have opened the tent and brought in tens of millions of people. So that is the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about is, I would agree with Mr. Gurumurthy, my good friend S. Gurumurthy of the what is it now, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, who is an old family friend and a personal friend, that the greatest followership of any temple in southern India is Sabrimala Ayyappan. I ask you the question, what does it tell you that in a country or a land of 2,000, 3,000 year culture with many temples that are 1,000, 1,500, 1,800, 700 years old, of the phenomenal, beautiful architecture of the big temple in Tanjore, or the Meenakshi Amman temple in Madurai, or the Pallava stone temples in the beach, despite having all of these temples, if the number one following is to a small hut in the hills where a man, my grandfather, donated the statue and had it installed, if that following is 10x or 100x or 1000x the temple followings of these other beautiful, archaeological, amazing, historical, hereditary temples, what does it tell you about the nature of religion? It is about what people believe. It is not something that is cast in stone, that it is a word of God that has been translated through something like the Bible or whatever. It is the belief of people that creates a followership, that creates a fellowship, that creates a natural affinity. And a temple that was burned in fire in 1950 and only has a new life since 51. If that can have 10x or 1000x the following of a temple that's 2000 years old, it tells you something about the nature of religion and religious beliefs. So I'll just leave you with that to interpret as you see fit.
Well, obviously, if you've thought about all this so much, Dr. Thiagarajan, I just, quickly, how would you look at the Hindu-Muslim sort of debate that you see in the North so much, especially with the BJP, and this whole Hindutva sort of emphasis on Hindutva versus Hinduism?
Again, listen, I think, in my constituency, about out of 240,000 voters, about maybe 10,000 or 12,000, maybe 15,000 are Muslims. Maybe another 8 or 10,000 or 5,000 are Christians. I don't know the exact number. But we all get along, and I don't make any distinction. In fact, if it had not been for the lockdown, I would have done something for them that I do every year, which is to hold a iftar, to hold a fast-breaking dinner. And the first year I went, and I did this as an MLA the first year, and one of the Maulvis, the scholars who spoke, said, listen, holding feasts and all is fine. But what we expect you to do, being a Hindu, being a devout Hindu, being a, what they call Manin Maindan or Meenakshi Maindan, a son of Meenakshi, because of my family. And I should mention my family's association with Meenakshi Amman temple goes back like 500-600 years. One of our ancestors, Harinath Muliyar, was the Dalavoy of the Vijayanagaram Nayak kings and built the 1,000-pillar mandapam in the temple. And his son Kaladinath Muliyar built the Amman Gopuram. So, our legacy goes back not just to my grandfather, but, many, many generations. So they see me as a devout Meenakshi, scion. They say, you must also commit to protecting our rights. And I told him, I said, the reason I come here and sit is not because you can't buy 5,000 rupees worth of rice or fruit or dates without me. It's not that I am here somehow making a big feast, it's a meager repast. But I come here and I sit here with the dot on my forehead, with the cap on my head, because I am here to say that as good as I believe, as much as my faith in God is, it encourages me to support your faith in your God. And I am here to show you that I honor my constitutional duty, that it is a secular country, and I will stand by you having the freedom to practice your faith. Because my faith is so important to me, then I am vested in ensuring that you get to practice your faith, which I assume is that important to you. So I am here for showing support, not because I feel like giving you some dates and some fruits and some plums and some juice is a big deal. So much so that after that, the next 2 years, I took my 2 sons with me. I don't take my sons to most political events. It's not their role. But when I went to these iftars for the next 2 years, I took my 2 sons with me, who were at the time 14, 12, 13 something. And they both put caps and sat. And I said, this is to show you that my great-grandfather, who was the friend of Haji Katrawutar in Uttampalayam, where our ancestral lands and our, kind of farm is, that relationship will continue beyond me to my children. And we will each practice our faith without interfering with each other and with the actual support and affection and love for each other. Therefore, I bring my children here that I do not take to a political event. So that's how we see it. We see it as a brotherhood. We see it as all those who really care about God, who have faith, must then embrace all those of whatever faith you have, rather than say, my faith is the only right faith, and therefore you are an infidel or you're a violator, or, that is a person who doesn't have any great love or respect for God, in my opinion.
How do you see what's happening in the North? And I asked you the question about...
It's depressing. Yeah, of course it's depressing to me. Of course, the politics of division are depressing and saddening and frustrating. And I'm grateful, of course, that it hasn't penetrated the South. But as a citizen of India, we're all one country, then of course it's deeply frustrating and distressing and depressing.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Thiagarajan, for your time, and we wish you all the best, not just as Finance Minister, but also your government. And thank you so much for speaking to the Print.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.